Hezbollah says it carried out another attack on northern Israel. The Israeli military confirmed several rockets had been launched from Lebanon early on Monday. An officer and a soldier were injured in the attack and have been taken to hospital. King Abdullah of Jordan has called for further international efforts to prevent a regional expansion of the conflict. His message came as Jordan's foreign minister met with the Iranian president to discuss the situation in the Middle East in a rare visit to Tehran. During that meeting, the president reiterated that Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh's assassination would not go unanswered. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Iran and its allies that his government would exact what he called a heavy price if it was attacked. Iran's blaming Israel for the assassination of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last week. Now, Hezbollah too has vowed to avenge the killing of a top commander by Israel earlier this week. And in the United States, Joe Biden will convene his national security team in the White House Situation Room to discuss all of these developments. It's being reported the US General in charge of the Middle East, General Michael Kurilla, is in the region for talks in Gulf countries and Israel. And King Abdullah of Jordan is also expected to speak with the US president. Well, for more on all of this, we are live in Washington. But first, let's head to Beirut and speak to Zaina Hodda. Zaina, as we wait for this promised Iranian and Hezbollah response, we're hearing reports of backdoor negotiations happening at the same time. What more can you tell us about those?
Well, yes, international and Arab diplomats trying to contain the possibility of a full-on regional war. Now, the message from Iran, media close to Iran, is that it will not be restrained, that a decision has been taken, especially since we heard from the Supreme Leader himself that there will be a severe punishment. Even the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, referred to Iran by saying that its dignity was harmed by in this attack that led to the death of Ismail Haniyeh, that assassination. So we saw the Jordanian foreign minister in a very rare visit in Tehran on Sunday. Yes, Jordan is in a very difficult position because the last time Iran directly attacked Israel, Jordan did play a role. It helped the U.S. military intercept Iranian missiles, and Iran has warned that any country that takes part or helps the United States will be considered a target. But while the Jordanians are saying they're not mediators and not delivering messages between Israel and Iran, he is talking about a very, serious escalation in this region. So the message from Iran is that we will not back down. Now, the question is, what kind of a response will Iran carry out, and what kind of a response Hezbollah will carry out, because Hezbollah too is threatening a harsh response for the killing of its chief of staff, really, in the heart of Beirut. But what is clear is that they both have to respond. This is very important for them because of deterrence. Iran thought the attack in April, would stop Israel from carrying out strikes in Iran. Now, of course, Israel has not claimed responsibility, but it is being blamed for killing Ismail Haniyeh. So, we are still very much in this standoff, waiting for this possible response, which really could escalate tensions in the region.
Yeah, Zaina, as well as all of that to consider, there's also been more fire along the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah says this, though, is not the response to the killing of its top commander, though.
Yes, the exchange of fire continues along that border, but what we've seen really in recent days is an increase in the tempo of operations, especially from Hezbollah carrying out sustained attacks. Now, this, of course, is not the promised response to the assassination of its chief of staff, but this is a message from Hezbollah that its rank and file has not been disrupted by the killing of its chief of staff. We have to remember just a few weeks ago, in recent months, they lost 3 of their top commanders in southern Lebanon. So these sustained attacks continuing, Israel too intensifying its airstrikes in southern Lebanon in the past 2 to 3 days, killing up to 6 people, 4 Hezbollah fighters, and we believe 2 paramedics were the target of an Israeli airstrike in the border village of Meis al-Jabal this morning. So tensions really at an all-time high. Hezbollah making clear that it could be more than one response. They're saying that they could hit the military target, even the Secretary General hinting that civilians also could be targeted. We are expected to hear from the Secretary General tomorrow, an expected speech tomorrow afternoon to mark the 1 week since the killing of its top commander.
Okay, thank you so much, Zana, for talking us through all of that. That's Zana Hotta for us in Beirut. Well, we're going to go now to Phil Lavelle, who is in Washington, D.C., covering reaction from the United States. Obviously, these latest developments show just how serious the US is taking all of this. Joe Biden convening his national security team, as well as one of the top generals here in the Middle East, talking to anyone and everyone that he can at this point in time to try and keep this from unravelling further.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing now is diplomacy at the highest level. The fact that we're going to have President Biden talking to King Abdullah of Jordan in the coming hours, just hours then before he convenes the security advisors in the Situation Room, because there is a very real awareness now that we may not be talking about weeks or even days. This could be something that takes place within a matter of hours. There is a very real fear that there could be an attack as early as Monday. And that is why we have seen over the last few days all of these meetings, all of these calls for de-escalation. The Defense Secretary here, Lloyd Austin, speaking to his Israeli counterpart twice in the last few days. Firstly, to reiterate America's commitment to Israel, but also calling for the need for de-escalation. Also, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, speaking to G7 nations today, or rather yesterday, to urge them to do whatever they can to exert any diplomatic pressure they can on Iran to really de-escalate this. And all of this, as we're seeing that military build-up, the fact that the USS Abraham Lincoln is on its way to the Middle East, the fact that there are cruisers, there are destroyers that have been deployed there are military personnel that are there, and Michael Kurilla, that senior military figure, also there, speaking to everybody he can to try to de-escalate this. And all of this against a backdrop where we are pretty much aware that the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden is at a very low point. The fact that we are told by advisors, or there have been leaks from advisors, that their last two conversations, one in person here in the US last week, one on the phone in recent days, have been tense. There was an expletive used by an unnamed official from the Biden administration to describe the reactions that they've been getting from Prime Minister Netanyahu. And in Haaretz, a Biden official was said to have said that Prime Minister Netanyahu is ungrateful for American support. So the fear is that even though America has to back Israel, it's its main supporter, its main protector, its main arms supplier, it too could be dragged into this wider conflict, which nobody really wants.
No, indeed. Well, the fact that we saw Iran attack Israel in April, will that give the US or Israel any sort of strategic advantage when it comes to the retaliation that seems inevitable from Iran?
Well, on the surface of it, you would think so. But of course, there are so many different variables now. The fact that, as Zaina was just saying, that Hezbollah has said that there could be a number of attacks. The fact that back in April, Iran telegraphed what it was going to do. Now, that was in the context of an Israeli strike against Iranian military generals in Damascus. So both sides almost got what they needed out of it. Iran got to show that it could respond. Israel got the warnings that it needed so that it could avoid any mass casualties, and both sides effectively got what they needed out of it. But here it is very different. We've heard from one unnamed Iranian diplomat who has apparently said that they are not telegraphing what is going to happen because Israel has crossed so many red lines, and therefore the potential for escalation is really, really high, especially if Israel does respond, as it is threatening to do, and the US feels that it has to protect.
OK, thank you so much for all of that, Phil. That's Phil Lavelle for us in Washington, D.C. OK, well, let's get some more analysis on this with Ibrahim Frahat. He is an Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute. Thanks for being with us here.
Thank you.
First of all, it seems like everyone, not just in the Middle East, but in the wider world, is waiting and anticipating a response from Iran. What will Iran be considering when it retaliates eventually?
Yes, I think there is a reason for everyone to expect a retaliation from Iran. And what to expect from Iran at this moment, one is that to respond to this unprecedented type of attack on Iranian soil, by Israel, crossing the darkest red line that one can do in relations with Iran, and by assassinating Ismail Haniyeh on their soil on that level. So this has put Iran in a very difficult position where it has to protect, it has to respond to this humiliation that Israel caused. It has to show that it's able to respond and to retaliate and to deliver a message that's equivalent to the type of attack that Israel has conducted.
So how does it go about doing all of those things without going too far and having even more blowback against Iran? Because we've heard Israel and the United States say that they will respond if Iran does retaliate.
Well, I think what we gather from official statements by Iranians is that Iran at this point does not really care. And we have plenty of evidence to suggest that the type of response that Iran is conducting is different in nature from the attack that the response that it delivered back in April, when it communicated the timing and the type of attacks that they're going to do. And the agreement, or the implicit agreement, was to deliver something symbolic. But now the Iranian leadership is making it clear we're not about symbolic response. There is a coordinated response with Hezbollah, and it has to hurt Israel the way that they are promising. And they made this public. Like, when you make these statements public, you're committing your political capital in the process, because now you are expected to deliver on this level. So that's why I think we are probably, in my view, this is the closest point that where we got to a serious tension, regional tension, and the closest point to a regional confrontation. Because yes, though despite the disagreements between the U.S. administration and the Israeli government, the U.S. remains committed to engage and to protect Israel and to respond, because there was a warning from the U.S. administration that if the Iranian response is strong, then we will respond as well. So now we are, at least on the rhetoric level, we're engaging in some sort of a regional confrontation.
You're a professor of conflict resolution. We've seen King Abdullah of Jordan, calling for more international efforts to try and bring the situation under control. What do you make of how the US is handling this, as well as other players in the region, in trying to de-escalate it? I mean, or is it just simply inevitable that this is going to, I guess, the tension is going to ramp up into more violence?
It's not inevitable at all, actually. And I think the U.S. administration bears the major responsibility here. And it's conducting, to answer your question, the conduct of the U.S. administration has been really terrible, because there is a way to avoid this. I think some sort of a serious American leadership to deliver an initiative at this point, speaking of conflict resolution, for example, is to stop the war in Gaza, right? And I think this would suffice for Iran to stop, or to stop itself from responding and engaging on this. But instead of delivering a political solution by a key player like the United States is sending more weapons and is arming more Israel and threatening to respond. This is not the way to de-escalate and resolve conflicts. This is the way to escalate and exacerbate conflicts.
At the same time, it sounds like the relationship between Netanyahu and Biden is deteriorating. It's a low ebb, as our correspondent in Washington said. So how is that going to impact what happens here, and how the US tries to control or manipulate Israel in terms of what's going to happen next?
Well, Biden is now in a more serious position where he can really claim leadership and take a position. He's now free from the constraints of the U.S. elections. He's not running for the U.S. elections. He made many threats during the past months to Netanyahu to try to intervene and take a position to stop Israel, but he has never delivered. Instead, he's sending more weapons and supporting more money and more diplomatic protection. You can't run this kind of diplomacy while you're sending more arms at the same time you are asking them to stop. So it's a contradiction that the U.S. administration is doing, and it's unfortunate that Israel is making the call here, and the U.S. administration is paying the bill, the financial, the diplomatic, and think of the credibility, the image of the U.S. The U.S. is isolated on this conflict on the world stage, where now Netanyahu is the only place where he is received is the U.S. Congress. No parliament in the world is willing to receive a war criminal that's wanted by the ICC except the U.S. Congress. This is extremely embarrassing and extremely isolating for the U.S. for the U.S. administration to be in this position. But instead, it seems that Netanyahu is making the call and is conducting and is executing his plans, and the U.S. here is coming to serve and to prevent Iran from responding and to pay the cost of the bill. That's an equation the U.S. administration should never accept. When Netanyahu makes the decision to escalate and assassinate in Iran and in Lebanon, which is something that Biden opposed, at least on the rhetoric level, on that level, then he should bear the responsibility, should take the consequences of his own actions, not that he makes the call and then Biden comes to support him and to serve and to pay the cost for that.
We'll have to leave it there, but as always, we really do appreciate your insight into all of this. That's Ibrahim Farhad for us there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.